So for anybody that knows me, they know that I love movies. Good, bad, don't really matter, but especially, and I mean especially, the bad, bro. I love bad movies, and the perfect bad B movie is like, well, it's kind of like the perfect bag of popcorn. So, in interest of me talking about movies on a YouTube platform, and quite frankly as a way to showcase movies that I think are otherwise underrated or people wouldn't normally see, and don't worry, I'm going to talk about the big budget bad movies when we get there, but you know, we'll get there. I've decided to make a series called Microwavable Reviews. Now, why did I call it Microwavable Reviews? Well, one, I'm hoping to be able to get these to be under a certain amount of minutes. Anything more than like 15 and you'll probably not see it, but who knows, it depends on how I feel. But also because I've kind of changed the structure of how I would normally do a review, as I tend to ramble a bit, so I've actually broken it down into parts, and basically those parts mimic what I think makes a perfect bad B movie, i.e., like I mentioned earlier, a perfect bag of popcorn. So the structure goes as such: the bag equals the plot, salt equals the characters, butter equals the things I liked about the movie, the kernels equals the things I didn't like, and the cook time, albeit me being cute because I'm kind of doing a reference to a bag of popcorn, is going to be my rating system, and at the end I'll give a summary of how I felt about the movie, but that's going to be displayed in minutes, 1 minute to 10 minutes, i.e. 1 star to 10 stars, and the 0.5s is just going to be 30 seconds. Listen, I ain't gonna hold you, bro. Like, don't let the media voice fool you when I do reviews. Like, we ain't doing no quick maths around here. We just gonna keep it at 0.3 and call it a day. Capiche? Capiche. Oh, also, you're probably not going to see much footage of the actual movie in and of itself. It's probably just going to be pictures and stills and whatnot, because, them YouTube content ID and copyright robots love to come and Weinstein you, and I ain't with it, bro. I ain't trying to get my channel pulled down. I'm already, I think a strike and a half in, and most of y'all don't even know who I am. But listen, enough about me elaborating on the rules. Y'all smart, y'all gonna figure it out, right? So the first movie I'll be looking at in this series is called The Family. Now, The Family is a 2013 black comedy, and I say that in quotes because usually when movies like this are listed as black comedies, a la The Room, a la Tiptoes, it usually means something that I'll talk about later down the line. But the story centers around a former mob boss and his wife and kids adjusting to a new life in, I think it's France. Actually, yes, it's definitely France, but I'm just gonna call it Alsace-Lorraine via Mickey Nose because that's funnier. But they're adjusting to life in this new country while under the watchful eye of witness protection, and on the run from Robert De Niro's former mob family. At least it's what the plot synopsis says it's about. In point of fact, it's actually about nothing. Well, 2/3 of it is about nothing, but honestly, I'm just getting angry thinking about it, and I'll handle this in the summary later. Let's just get to the characters, quote unquote. So in our cavalcade of stupidity, there is this girl. Listen, I don't know. To be honest, when I looked at this movie online and I decided to watch it, it was because I like Robert De Niro and I like mob movies. It also has Michelle Pfeiffer in it, who I do like as well. And this girl, I believe, is from Glee. Running through reading comments on the trailer for this video, the people who like it seem to be obsessed with it, but only for the concept of the fact that there are celebrities in it. They just talk about how much they love the girl from Glee. They don't even mention this woman's name. I have no clue what it is offhand. And I feel bad for just calling her a girl, but she essentially has no character in this movie. She exists to fuck some old dude who claims to be like a high schooler. I guess he's supposed to be like 18 or something like that, but he looks about 35. And that pedo bear not wanting to bang her anymore leads her to wanting to kill herself, and so she's standing on the roof at the end of the movie for plot convenience. I'd call her plot convenience, but even that's too much character for her. But to be fair, this was 2013, and there was a rash of, well, every 10 years or so, there's a new pretty blonde white girl with red lips who tends to show up and be in a bunch of movies and TV shows and things like that, and usually last about 10 to 15 years of them doing that, and then they switch over to a new pretty blonde white girl. And the 2010s pretty much exclusively featured this girl. In the early 2000s, it was Alicia Silverstone and Heather Graham, and in the modern era, assuming that it would, at least in my opinion, be Emily Lind, but I actually like Emily Lind. I don't fucking watch Gossip Girl because I'm not a 22-year-old white girl from New York City, but I also haven't lived in New York City in 15 years. But seeing as how I like Emily Lind and this girl has no character, I'm just gonna call her Shitty Emily Lind. So we got Shitty Emily Lind, a Thum from Spy Kids, Aging Gracefully Emily Lind, and the Irish Coffeeman. You may be questioning yourself, why don't I call these characters by their characters' names or even the actors' names? Because it doesn't matter. Whoever thought up this movie did it in about 15 minutes, so why should I put the effort into giving these characters names when they don't have actual actual character. Oh, and Jamie Lee Curtis from Halloween Resurrection's in here too as the piece of Chalif. She just sits around following Robert De Niro around, telling him to stop being famous for being in the mob, and that's pretty much it. But I don't want to fall into just complaining about the movie. I mean, the characters being bad is a big part of it, but I'll get to it down when I get to the kernels. I want to talk about the good stuff. And some of the good stuff is that a couple of the characters do actually do things. The Thumb from Spy Kids actually spends most of the movie acting like an actual mob kid. He's out there like making deals and selling homework and things like that and hustling like Hustler Kid from Recess. And he actually has somewhat agency to the plot because the things he's doing in order to cut corners around in school inevitably lead the mobsters from America back out to Alsace-Lorraine in order to try to kill Irish coffeemen. And so there's him that does something, which is kind of cool. I mean, that's the whole point. It's supposed to be a mob movie about a mob family, and the whole family knows that they're mobsters, and the only other person who does anything mob related is aging gracefully Emily Lind, who like blows up a bunch of Frenchies for making fun of her for not knowing how to count, and I don't know what French people use for money. Pence, schmeckles.
Schmeckles, I don't know how much, I don't know what that is.
And I mean, to be fair, the Irish Coffeeman does do stuff, but the only problem with what he does is that 40 to 30% of the movie, he just spends the time exposition dumping on everyone's chest the plot of Goodfellas, because he's supposed to vaguely be Henry Hill, or at least like what you would imagine Henry Hill would have been had he been put in witness protection and moved out to like France or whatever. But in real life, Henry Hill was moved to like Minnesota or something like that and just had to live like a schnuck. And I know that seems kind of harsh. I mean, there are actually other good parts to the movie, even though I'm kind of playing it like it's not. There's more than just Thumbelina and aging gracefully Emily Lind. The Irish Coffeeman actually does have some really good subplots going on there. In fact, he's got about 3 of them. There's one of him trying to ingratiate his family into this new Frenchy town in Alsace-Lorraine, which actually ties into a different subplot about the fact that there's a pesticide company that's poisoning the water in Alsace-Lorraine, and Robert De Niro actually goes and deals with it by beating the ever-loving shit out of the guy, and then that does actually pay off later in the movie towards the end, where he turns on the water and he realizes that the water is clean and that they kept their promise. And then also bungled into that whole him ingratiating his family with the Frenchies is them inviting him to a movie watching thing, mostly because they find out that he's a writer, because there is the third subplot of him being a writer and basically writing what is the book that will go on to inspire Goodfellas, because he's vaguely supposed to be Henry Hill. But when he shows up to this literary club, they wind up watching Goodfellas, and he's there with the piece of Chalif. And all joking aside, Robert De Niro actually gives a very well or moderately well acted scene where he is talking about himself, i.e. Henry Hill, in the third person, and explaining how Henry Hill never wanted to be a bad guy. He was a nice kid who grew up poor, and unfortunately the world beat him down to the point where he had to pretty much fight back or die. It's a pretty good scene because the eye contact that's being given by Jamie Lee Curtis over to the Irish Coffeeman kind of sort of indicates that they may be building some sort of bond, and that they may be actually becoming friends, or that so many years of him being the piece of Chalif and following Robert De Niro around in order to make sure he don't do more mob stuff is actually starting to see him as a person. I can speak to this personally because I have a family member who was a cop and has arrested a bunch of other people in the past who seem to be quote unquote horrible people, but then he wound up becoming friends with them while they were already in prison. So this is a thing that happens, and if it was expanded upon, it'd be kind of sweet. But then that kind of leads to my big problem with this movie and why the butter can't even actually just be butter and be good. Is the fact that 75% of the plot / characters just go nowhere. I mean, perfect example being shitty Emily Lind. She has no character whatsoever, but she's also the only person whose subplot actually goes somewhere. The fact that she's banging Jeffrey Epstein does lead to the climax of the movie, which is her standing on the roof when the mobsters come to attack her and her family because she's decided to kill herself because Pedo Bear doesn't want to sleep with her anymore, which is really just plot convenience, and it adds to the fact that even more so that she doesn't mean anything to the plot. Although to be fair, Thumbelina's plotline does lead the mob to finding them, so technically his does end, but aging gracefully Emily Lind just kills a bunch of Frenchies and then moves on. And the most disappointing part about the whole thing is that the Irish Coffeeman has these multiple hanging subplots that could all be woven together perfectly, but they just go nowhere. They stop dead in order for the mob to show up and for shitty Emily Lind to hang out with Thumbelina and do X-Strike a bunch of times like they're playing Chrono Trigger. Seriously, just vibe with me for a minute on the concept that something could be better than just mediocrity, right? There's this entire subplot about Irish Coffeeman joining up with this literary group group and writing this book about being on a mob. There's that secondary subplot about the pesticide company poisoning the water in Alsace-Lorraine. There's the subplot with Irish Coffeeman about the Frenchies not really particularly liking him, but they inevitably come around once they find out he's an author. So how about instead of having shitty Emily Lind standing on a roof threatening to kill herself in order for her to help be able to save the day at the end of the movie, probably because you didn't want to pay for any extras to actually do anything, have it that after that super emotional scene, by the way, of Robert De Niro explaining how he didn't want to be a bad dude and how he didn't want to be a mobster and kill people, what if he just accidentally created a mob in Alsace-Lorraine? I mean, the people clearly respect him there. Wouldn't it have been much more interesting if, hey, he's writing this book, he's out here doing this literature stuff and meeting people, and the whole point of the subplot of Jamie Lee Curtis telling him not to write a book and not to become famous because it'll bring the mob's attention to him literally doesn't matter, because it's not what does it. And two, would actually matter to the plot if it was the fact that he accidentally created a new mob in Alsace-Lorraine. And I mentioned it earlier, the whole him giving that speech on stage right there and getting emotional and potentially exposing to Jamie Lee Curtis that he's not that bad of a dude could have led to them having a better understanding going down the line. At most, it kind of just ends in the movie of them like nodding to each other with the understanding that, you know, hey, we killed these mobsters, so I'm not in the run anymore, but, you know, technically you killed a bunch of people, so, you know, we got to put you back in hiding again. So they kind of give each other a nod at the end of it, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, even when you get down to the brass tacks of him building this relationship with the people in Alsace-Lorraine, like, them Frenchies were knowingly having their water poisoned by a pesticide company. He beats up the pesticide company dude off screen. You just see him all fucked up, and Robert De Niro threatened him because also another thing that's annoying as hell in this movie is that all the scenes where Robert De Niro fucks people up, minus I think like 2 of them, are all in his head, and that's where it gets the quote-unquote dark comedy or black comedy or whatever the fuck you want to call it moniker from. But wouldn't it have been better if like the Frenchies decided to team up with Robert De Niro to go fix their own water supply? Or maybe that when he beat the shit out of the pesticide dude, they found out about it, maybe someone in the town even saw him do it, and then they decided, oh shit, he might actually be this mobster dude. If he did this for us, why don't we just go out there and save him from these mobsters? It would have been much more climactic to have the entire town rally alongside Irish Coffeeman in order to help save him and his family, who have now, hopefully, if you've written the movie well, become ingratiated in this town in Alsace-Lorraine. But instead they chose to do nothing and go nowhere and just constantly have Robert De Niro on the screen talking to himself like he is Henry Hill. It's just filled with references. Like I said, it goes nowhere. The only one who does anything, Stumbleina accidentally leads the mob to them through plot convenience, by the way, because all he did was write a joke that he heard as a kid from one mobster that wound up in a French newspaper that just so happened to be wrapped around some fish that got given to a mobster who was in jail, which is just a recreation of the fucking jail scene from Goodfellas, because that's all this movie is. It's the Cliff Notes versions of whatever the hell Henry Hill did after he left the mob. But as it currently stands, the mob knows jack shit about where he is. Then they just Mr. Magoo their way around France in order to find him, and then when they do get to him, he just easily kills them for the most part. Like I said, shitty Emily Lind and Thumbelina do X-Strike a bunch of times. Aging gracefully, Emily Lind gets beat up and potentially Weinsteined until the Irish Coffeeman drunkenly chokes out a fat guy, and then Jamie Lee Curtis runs over a dude at the end of the movie to save shitty Emily Lind, because that's the only way you could build character with her, which is to put her in some dumbass like last minute, oh no, she might get killed, which honestly would have made the movie a little bit better because she doesn't matter to the plot. But all this movie overall is doing is just begging people to recognize the people on screen. It's like, oh, I recognize that girl from Glee. Oh, hey, look, it's Michelle Pfeiffer. That's Catwoman. Oh, hey, look, it's Rob De Niro. Oh, hey, look, Goodfellas is on the screen. Blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, really just a disappointing half-assed try. And I mean, listen, I get it, you know, honestly, I feel like movies like this, or at least a situation like this, is very similar to a movie like Tiptoes. It seems as though there was a lot of like studio interference, and I can't tell that for sure. But in most cases like this, where the plot goes nowhere and you just paid people to be in a movie, it's either 1, a giallo film, which I love Italian horror, 2, a shitty straight to VOD movie that probably has Bruce Willis in it, or 3, there was tons of studio involvement and they kind of ganked the system super hard and just jacked the script, or maybe changed it at the last minute. You know, something like Ghost Ship, it was supposed to be a psychological horror, but then they decided to capitalize on the horror. Maybe this was supposed to be a straight up mob movie. Maybe it was supposed to be a more spiritual successor to Goodfellas, but then they couldn't get the rights, so they just changed it and had to change a bunch of stuff around and didn't really know what to do, because most of the plot hung around the family actually being who they were in the book. I mean, the third option is that this whole thing could have been like a weird Uwe Ball tax scheme, but I really doubt that. That really wouldn't benefit anyone around here, that I don't think. Or in that case, it would still be one of those straight to VOD Steven Seagal shot on shitio films. But I'm gonna stop blathering on, because all I want to say is that, in short, if I were to best describe this movie as it relates to popcorn, like the theme I made earlier, it's a rip bag where half the popcorn spilled out and virtually no salt or butter, just the burnt kernels at the bottom. Which is to say, I enjoyed the top layer of it, and then when I got to the bottom of the bag, I was like, oh, this is garbage, and I accidentally burnt it. And seeing as how this movie's only like 33% complete in my personal opinion, I'm gonna have to give it 3 minutes and 30 seconds out of 10. I wouldn't recommend watching this movie at all, not even with friends, not even if you were drunk. It literally just hurts your brain at the potential that was just thrown away or potentially lost. I just used the word potential twice in a row, so now that has no meaning to me. But like I said, it's just sad to see, because it's a genre of movies that I like that is actually populated by actors and actresses that I also like. It just doesn't go anywhere.
Look at that, look. What the fuck is going on?